Tonight on Primetime, NATO leaders meet in Ankara as the alliance weighs Ukraine's support, defense spending, industrial capacity, and the future of U.S. security commitments across Europe and beyond. NATO's burden-sharing battle begins. Welcome to the program. I'm Andy Mioch. NATO leaders have gathered in Ankara for a summit dominated by defense spending, Ukraine support, and the alliance's long-term security posture. Hosted by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the talks are also expected to focus on defense production, burden sharing, and future U.S. military commitments in Europe. Adam Morrow reports from Ankara.
The NATO summit has opened here in Ankara, bringing together leaders from the alliance's 32 member states at the presidential complex for 2 days of high-level talks. Host President Recep Tayyip Erdogan is welcoming leaders as the alliance confronts some of its most significant security challenges in decades. U.S. President Donald Trump is attending the summit, and there are expectations for bilateral talks with Erdogan on defense cooperation and broader strategic relations. Defense spending will also be among the summit's central themes. In a pre-summit press conference Monday, NATO chief Mark Rutte said European allies, along with Canada, had substantially increased military spending over the past 2 years. NATO leaders are expected to discuss plans for meeting the alliance's long-term goal of spending 5% of GDP on defense and related security investments. Another major focus will be strengthening NATO's defense industrial base. At a defense industry forum taking place alongside the summit, allies are expected to announce major procurement and production initiatives with a view to expanding military manufacturing capacity and improving interoperability across the alliance. The war in Ukraine also remains high on the agenda. Leaders are likely to discuss continued military assistance to Kiev, air defense support, and the broader security implications of the conflict for Europe and the Black Sea region. The summit is also taking place against the backdrop of instability in the Middle East and ongoing discussions about the future U.S. military presence in Europe. A joint summit declaration is expected after leaders conclude their formal sessions, outlining NATO's priorities on collective defense, burden sharing, and long-term security cooperation. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Turkish capital Ankara.
NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte says 11 member states will jointly procure a new generation of airborne warning and control system aircraft to replace parts of NATO's aging fleet. Nuray Mustafa has more on that from Ankara.
500. Speaking at a forum held as part of the NATO summit in Ankara, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced a significant new initiative. He said that 11 allied countries have agreed to jointly acquire new AWACS aircraft as part of the NATO's next-generation airborne early warning and control system. The decision aims to replace part of NATO's aging fleet of Boeing A3 AWACS aircraft with more advanced platforms. The new system will enhance the alliance surveillance capabilities across air, land and maritime domains while improving the detection of emerging threats, including unmanned aerial vehicles, ballistic missiles and cruise missiles. Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Germany, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Norway, Romania and Sweden are participating in the initiative. Nuray Mustafa, Avaz Hacı for A News, Ankara, Turkey.
Well, joining us now from Sakarya, Turkey, is Middle East expert Dr. Furkan Yolcu. Dr. Yolcu, welcome to Primetime. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, NATO is meeting in Ankara right now with Russia's war in Ukraine, defense spending, and the situation in the Middle East all on the table. What would you say is the real test for the alliance today?
My biggest claim on the clash of interests will be the main focus area between the transatlantic pact members, because what we see is that now the United States prime interests and the European prime interests are now diverging from each other at a pace, and now two parties cannot really find middle ground to create common interests that would push international organizations such as NATO. Because even from the beginning of these constructed institutions, the way that work, they need common interests from all of the member countries, so that these initiatives, these common interests can be pursued through international institutions like these. Because without the member interest and without member presence and investment to these institutions, they don't mean much, yeah? So the interests should be common, and members should be investing in these to actualize the common gains or common agenda that would have been set up by the national interests of these countries. At the moment, United States is prioritizing China and Iran over Russia and other problems, while the European counterparts of the transatlantic part are very much focusing on Ukraine, very much focusing on Russia to counteract against it and counterbalance it. So I think this rift between these two parties of the Atlantic Ocean will be on the spotlight.
And when it comes to one of those fronts, Russia remains one of the main threats and the threat because of which NATO was built to deter the Russians. Now, after years of war in Ukraine, would you say the alliance looks stronger now or just more exposed?
Well, I'm on the exposed side a bit, but I think it's stronger than before, because when NATO needed to intervene in Libya, it was late and it wasn't in time, and France had to initiate the intervention individually without expecting any decisions from NATO and UN, because practically the institutional decision-making process was slower than it needed to be. But for Ukraine, I think we see a more robust and consolidated response from NATO against the very big and conceived threat, which is Russia, which is basically one of the reasons why we have NATO. But in the end, it's exposed because it's not really unifying in terms of common interests. It's also pushing and pursuing for interests of the members that has the majority of shares in terms of investment, in terms of power. When I say shares, I see it as a balance of power. Even within NATO, there is a balance of power. There are great powers, there is a superpower, there are middle powers, and there are small powers. And we see that NATO is practically pursuing the great power interest once again, which is actually limiting Russia to the eastern part of Europe, you know?
Now, when it comes to that influence of that superpower, NATO is now pushing allies to boost their defense spending to 5% of GDP. Would you say that is a genuine strategic shift, or is it just an admission that Europe has been underprepared for a very long time?
I mean, it's both practically, because the general threshold that Trump wanted the European states to come up with was 2% at least. He had like a 2% minimum threshold for the NATO members and other European Union members, so that US would continue in investing European security. He said, if Europe is not investing 2% of its GDP to its own security, why would United States come in and cover up the European disadvantages in providing the security that they needed because of the Russian expansion and other economical and fiscal expansions of China? So now taking it to a 5% is actually a strategic shift for the European countries, maybe not for the United States, but for the eastern part of the transatlantic pact. It's a major shift, strategic shift. But again, it's also, in a way, is a continuation of what we had in mind, because the project was to spare a certain percentage of the GDP to defense and security so that Europe wouldn't need any other country to continuously intervene into European affairs and to defend itself from the other expansionist big powers around it. So I think I'm gonna take like A, B, and both on this question.
And in that vein, would you say that this summit is perhaps an opportunity, a chance for Europe and Canada to prove to Washington, okay, here we are picking up the tab, we're going to pay for our own defense, don't suspend any of the activities the US has in NATO?
The thing is, I don't really believe that Europe is fiscally ready to spare 5% of their GDPs, including Canada. I don't think these countries are ready because they don't have the customs to spend 5% of their GDPs, which makes around, even for Germany, it's around $200 billion that we are talking about. These countries are usually spending 40 billion dollars at a year for their overall defense and security needs. So this is a big leap for them to cover up in their budget planning, in their 5-year planning, 10-year planning. This is gonna take a very big chunk of budget for them. They would have already separated to public spending, Commonwealth, etc., which within the 5 and 10-year plans that are already established and that are already in the development plans that the countries are actually executing and following. And it's really hard for these countries to change these plans because these are very long-term plans.
And as that gradual change happens or does not happen, we see so many things happening in the background. There's the war in Ukraine, there's the situation in Gaza, there is the situation in Lebanon. Is NATO adapting to a more dangerous world in an acceptable pace, or are things catching up to them?
I think I'm gonna go with the latent option again, because it's even since the Arab revolutions, I think NATO has been left behind and it's not really catching up to the moment, catching up to the pace, the rapidity of change and challenges coming from the interstate wars. Because what happened in Arab revolution was a civil war, yeah, and it's easier to control civil wars and internal revolutions and revolts by certain groups, militants, terrorists, whatever you want to call them. It's easy for global groups of states to control, as NATO, United Nations didn't really hesitate to intervene in these kind of situations in Libya, in Rwanda, in Syria, in other cases in Bosnia, etc. But controlling interstate wars, as we see in Ukrainian war, it's really, really tactically very hard. From a military security theoretical point of view, from a diplomatic international relations point of view, both, it's very hard in the field, it's very hard on the table to technically take things under control. And I think NATO is like failing behind in terms of catching up the rapidity and the dynamism of these international relations that we have now, as all of the major cities are under threat of terrorism, and the big powers, the global powers that we have, don't really care much about technically protecting civilian life, but what they care is their national interests and the global threats to their economic interests, not even the territorial interests. And I think NATO just like missed that train by a mile.
Dr. Yolcu, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight and analysis.
Thank you.
All right, after a short break, we'll take a closer look at the strained Yerevan-Moscow relations as Armenia's prime minister expresses hope they could be mended in his first visit to Russia since winning re-election. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This record having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to minus 50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states toward Siberia.
Welcome back, you're watching Primetime. Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan says he hopes to repair relations with Russia after recent trade restrictions disrupted imports of Armenian goods. Speaking during talks with the Russian Prime Minister, he said the two sides should address the issues that have emerged in recent months. The meeting comes after Pashinyan secured re-election while continuing to balance Armenia's ties with both Russia and the European Union. Addressing the talks, he outlined how he sees the future of Armenia's relationship with Moscow.
A number of problematic issues have arisen recently, and of course, I hope that we will discuss and resolve these matters. Both before and after the elections, we are inclined to further develop our relations with the Russian Federation. And of course, we are interested in our participation in Eurasian Economic Union.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Anastasia Lavrina, host of Inside Politics and Frontline here on A News. Anastasia, welcome. Always great to have you with me here in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Pashinyan says he wants to repair ties with Russia after those trade restrictions hit Armenian goods. What do we actually know about how serious this row has become?
Well, indeed, there is a serious concern on what is happening between two countries, Armenia and Russia. Within the last half a year, I will say, we can see how many difficulties appeared in the bilateral relations, specifically after Armenia's official declared its willingness to have more pro-European foreign policy and the willingness to have European Union integration. Then recent visit of the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and actually that was the first such a level of visit of the European institutional representative to Armenia after Nikol Pashinyan won the election and secured the majority for himself in the parliament. And what's happened now, it's the first official foreign visit Prime Minister is taking, and it's happening in Russia. In this meeting, as it's already been said, he met with Mikhail Mishustin, and it was highlighted that yes, Armenia is willing to have more, let's say, better relations with Russia, but he also stated that there is a difficulties two sides have to overcome. The reality is that Armenia is trying to balance understanding that now it cannot stop all the relations with Russia, but at the same time understanding that Russia will not accept its if Armenia have more, let's say, more pro-European integration as it's happening at the moment. Armenia is not that much strong, and it cannot have more or less balanced policy. It has to choose. It was stated by President Putin during the meeting with Nikol Pashinyan some months before. Armenia has to decide whether it wants to be a member of Eurasian Union integration, or it has to be more pro-European oriented, meaning that it will do its best to become a member of the European Union. But for Armenia, it's important to have some guarantees. European Union, of course, saying, as Ursula von der Leyen during her visit to the South Caucasus stated, that Europe is willing to support Armenia in the policy of diversification and even helping Armenia to overcome those difficulties which is happening due to the restrictions imposed by Russia. Because Russia, yes, imposed some restrictions for the goods, vegetables and fruits, which is being imported from Armenia. And for Armenia, it's important to find the alternative market, but it's not easy time. It's not so easy procedure to change everything and to, let's say, change the directions of the Armenian products to the European markets. As it was stated again by the Ursula von der Leyen, there will be some simplifications for Armenia to have this diversified policy, but it will take time. So now I think what Nikol Pashinyan is doing, he's taking the time, he's trying to win some time, showing to the Russian Federation that yes, Armenia is still willing to have more, let's say, prosperous relations. It still wants to be a member of Eurasian Union, but it is still at the same time willing to have more pro-European integration. Balanced policy until the time while Armenia will be strong enough to say its own words in the relations, whether it's with Europe or with Russia.
And now on those restrictions, Russians officially are saying that it's due to regulations, standards, but the timing is, of course, hard to ignore. Is it this European course that's making this appear much larger than a trade dispute?
Absolutely. Armenia is openly stating that it wants to be a member of the European Union. It's developing its defense cooperation with NATO member countries. It's signing the agreements with the countries like France to import the defense capabilities and defense equipment. It was demonstrated during the parade in Yerevan in May. So, but at the same time, it's saying that we want to still be a member of Eurasian integration. It's impossible for Armenia to keep these both directions. It's not strong enough, as I already said. This economy, it still depends much on the cooperation with Russia. And whether it's Armenia is more important for Eurasian Union or it's Eurasian Union more important for Armenia, that's a big question. Yes, of course, Russia still win if it has more balanced and prosperous relations with Armenia. And of course, Russia doesn't want to lose its partner in the region of the South Caucasus. If we see the dynamics, there are three countries in the South Caucasus. You know, it's yourself, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. And among all of these countries, Armenia is the closest partner, strategic partner for Russia when it comes to energy cooperation and economic integration and cooperation, all of these processes. So for Armenia, it's a very difficult balance. It's a very difficult, and it's easy to say, to make a political statement that Armenia is willing to have pro-European integration. But from the real perspectives, how quick this procedure may take place, how exactly Armenia is willing to decrease the level of its dependence on Russia and have more prosperous relations with the European Union. The Russian military base is in Armenia. The energy prosperity and energy security of Armenia still depends on Russia, despite the fact that it has the intentions to decrease the level of dependency and economic cooperation, which I already mentioned. So what Nikol Pashinyan is doing at the same time, and I guess it's a right decision, he's trying to develop the regional cooperation. That's exactly what Azerbaijani President, His Excellency Ilham Aliyev, has been talking for many years, I will say, explaining the reality in the region itself, that the future of Armenia will much more depends on its, let's say, on its pragmatic cooperation with regional partners like Azerbaijan and Turkey. And just remember, recently Nikol Pashinyan himself stated that he wants to have economic cooperation and energy cooperation, because he is understanding his energy independence and energy diversification will much depend on how quick the borders will be opened with two countries in the region, with Azerbaijan and Turkey. When Azerbaijani experience will be also beneficial for Armenia, and how soon Armenia will be able to join the existing energy pipelines in the region, or probably working on the new projects like the Middle Corridor or Zangezur Corridor, or how it's being also called TRIP corridor. In Yerevan, there is a clear understanding that many countries in the region, European Union and also United States, is willing to see these transport arteries to be developed in the region. Donald Trump himself is paying particular attention on the development of the infrastructure in the region of the South Caucasus. And Ursula von der Leyen, in her official statement in Baku, said that Europe is willing to, and even willing to invest and to see the development of the transport integration in the region of the South Caucasus. So for Nikol Pashinyan, for his country, it's very important to work more intensively on the development of the relations with the regional partners. And from this perspective, we are coming to the key question: how soon Armenia will be able to sign a comprehensive peace agreement with Azerbaijan, meaning that how quick it can have a constitutional changes to remove any territorial claims against neighboring countries, against Azerbaijan. Then the borders will be opened, Armenia will join the global initiative, will get a status of a transport and energy hub in the region as well. So for the first time in its modern history, Armenia will become a transit country. So it will indeed benefit and will improve the economic capabilities of Armenia, and it will help Nikol Pashinyan and his government to have more pragmatic and more balanced policy when it comes to whether it's Europe or Russia.
And Anastasia, do you believe that Yerevan will try to balance between the European Union and Russia until such a time that such regional cooperation can be pulled off?
It has no other option. Indeed, we have to be realistic about what is happening. Europe may offer money, its support, its the visit which we can see is happening, but from the real perspective, from the real situation, what we see today, Armenia is still too much dependent on Russia. And the largest Armenian diaspora is living in Russia. I mean, those who are still sending the money to the relatives who are staying in Armenia. Armenia is still in much dependence from the economic and energy perspective, as I already said, and the military base of the Russian Federation is in Armenia. So for Russia, it's important to keep Armenia in its own influence in the region because of those difficulties which is still existing with Georgia. The dynamics is that Russia is willing to see Armenia in its sphere of influence. It's not ready to allow Armenia to be more independent. And Armenia is still not strong enough to be independent from Russia. So it will take time. And yes, we do remember what's happened with Georgia. So many years are taking place on the ground while the discussions, negotiations is happening with the European Union. But in reality, Georgia is still not a member of European Union. There is still a number of countries who are waiting. And remember how many decades Turkey was willing to become a member of the European Union. So for Armenia, from the real perspective, what we see today, there should be a more technical approach. If Armenia wishes to send its products to Europe, then how exactly it's planning to have it? Through Georgia or through Turkey? In order to do it from Turkey, then it has to open the border with Turkey to have more real cooperation. Then the transport links, then the reliability of the products, let's say the fruits and the vegetables which is being sent to Russia, it takes much less time rather than it's the same to be sent to Europe. And even if Europe is ready to, let's say, sponsor the projects, to send the money, to cover the financial expenses. It will take years to make the real projects to be on the ground that will help Armenia to have this diversified policy. But from the other perspective, coming back to the region, as I already said, the real chances and the real perspective is the Zangezur corridor, because it's already United States that support that, it's Azerbaijan, it's China. As Zangezur corridor, it's an essential part of the middle corridor that is a part of China's Belt and Road. So the real perspective is in the region. And probably after the successful realization of these regional communications, that would be a part of the more significant projects that will connect Armenia with Europe. So from the real perspective, as for today, Nikol Pashinyan and his government has to balance. And taking into account that Russia is also willing to have Armenia, remember how many times there were the statements made by the highest level officials in Russia that it will stop the cooperation, it will make sure that Armenia is no longer a member of Eurasian Union, it will impose the sanctions. How many months this rhetoric continues? But until today, nothing happened. Only some restrictions to the imported goods, products from Armenia. No real consequences, meaning that Moscow is also willing to keep Armenia in the sphere of its influence, making the statement that yes, if nothing changes, there will be more serious concern for Armenia. And even during this meeting with Mikhail Mishustin, it was stated that yes, the willingness of two countries to overcome the difficulties, but the reality is that the difficulties are on the ground, and the countries have to work on that to make sure. By the way, for Armenia, for Russia now, Ukraine is more important directions to work on, taking into account all of those difficulties it faces, all of those challenges. By the way, just recently, Russian drone attacked the Sokar fossil fuels in a station in Ukraine, and it was a big concern in the relations between two countries, Azerbaijan and Russia. So what's happening in Ukraine now, it's a number one priority for Russia. Then of course what's happening in the Middle East, it will also have, and it already has its own consequences. And of course for Armenia, Russia is trying to balance, trying to be in touch with the Armenian government to follow the developments. But it's not number one priority at the current level of the Russian foreign policy.
Great insight as always, Anastasia. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you for having me.
All right, after the break, we'll take a look at the top business stories of the day with Katie Wilson. Don't go away.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back. It is now time for the top business stories of the day. And for those, we turn to Katie Wilson. Katie, what have you got for us tonight?
So we've got the latest spending announcements from some governments as the NATO summit is taking place in Ankara. There's some more on AI investment and also how America's 250th anniversary celebrations are boosting the economy over there. So first this evening, ahead of the NATO summit, Canada is making one of its biggest military purchases in decades. The government has selected Germany's TKMS to build up to 12 new submarines, strengthening defence ties with Europe.
I'm pleased to announce that Canada has selected TKMS as the preferred supplier for Canada's patrol submarine project.
Germany's TKMS is to build up to 12 submarines for Canada's Navy as it deepens ties with Europe. TKMS, majority owned by German conglomerate ThyssenKrupp, beat out a competing offer from South Korea's Hanwha Ocean. Speaking at a news conference, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney didn't give the cost of the purchase.
We face numerous and growing threats, from incursions in our Arctic to attacks in our cyberspace. The nature of warfare is changing rapidly, driven by a proliferation of drones, autonomous systems, hypersonic missiles, to name a few. The world's changed, Canada must change with it.
Carney was speaking before flying to a NATO summit in Turkey. Canada is under pressure from the US to increase defence spending and has said it hit NATO's military spending target of 2% of GDP earlier than originally planned. NATO leaders have agreed to spend 5% of GDP on defence and security investments by 2035. Canada has the world's largest coastline and currently has only one functioning submarine. TKMS has offered to reallocate boats from German and Norwegian orders, allowing for early delivery of the first 4 submarines by 2034. Carney added that Canada would receive tens of billions of dollars in investments from TKMS.
Turning to global trade now, 2 of the world's biggest shipping companies are returning to the Suez Canal after years of avoiding the route over security fears. The move could speed up deliveries between Europe and Asia, but investors worry it may also drive freight rates lower.
Shipping giants Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd will resume some sailing through the Suez Canal. That's according to a Maersk statement on Monday. The Danish firm said it will come under their joint network called Gemini. The Asia-Europe trade corridor through the Suez Canal was abandoned by most shippers in recent years after attacks in the Red Sea by Yemen's Houthis. It forced shipping companies to take the much longer trip around Africa's Cape of Good Hope, but they're now considering a return to the Red Sea route. Maersk said the decision with Hapag-Lloyd comes after what it called thorough assessments of the security situation in the Red Sea. The route through the Suez Canal and Red Sea is the fastest linking Europe and Asia. Industry data has shown it made up for 1/10 of global seaborne trade until the attacks began. Some investors weren't thrilled by the news. Both Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd shares slipped on Monday's update, with the Danish firm down more than 6% at one stage. Investors were concerned about the potential impact on freight rates. The longer journeys around Africa drove up shipping rates, which made freight more expensive.
And the AI boom continues to boost record profits for the world's biggest chip makers. Samsung says its second quarter operating profit is set to surge nearly 19-fold from a year ago, as soaring demand outweighs the concerns over whether the AI spending frenzy can last.
Samsung on Tuesday said it expects a 19-fold leap in profits over the second quarter from a year earlier. The South Korean giant said operating profit would come in at over $58 billion, ahead of analyst estimates. Revenue is expected to soar 129%. It all comes as the global AI boom drives soaring demand for chips, sending prices for silicon sky high. That's a direct boon for Samsung, which is the world's largest maker of memory chips. The company is seeing income surge even as it sets aside massive funds for worker bonuses. And most analysts expect things to get even better. One told Reuters that the memory chip shortage would only get worse this year and next, further supporting prices. Others said customers were also seeking to sign longer-term supply deals, meaning the high prices could be locked in for longer. In a recent report, Goldman Sachs forecast AI-related spending by US giants like Microsoft and Meta would exceed $5 trillion by 2030. However, some market watchers warn that the big risk to firms like Samsung is a sudden slowdown in investment that dents demand. Shares in the firm fell over 8% by lunchtime following Tuesday's news. Some traders said investors were disappointed that the company's earnings guidance wasn't even more bullish. Shares in the company are still up around fivefold over the past year.
Well, the AI boom does have winners and losers. Microsoft is cutting around 5,000 jobs as it ramps up spending on artificial intelligence. The company says the layoffs are part of a wider restructuring to support its AI ambitions, even as soaring investment in data centers puts pressure on costs.
Microsoft is cutting more than 2% of its workforce, or roughly 4,800 jobs, joining other tech titans in a wave of layoffs as they shift investments to AI infrastructure. In a memo to employees, Microsoft's chief people officer said the roles being eliminated won't be replaced by AI, but are part of a broader effort to realign resources as AI changes how the company works. Booming AI demand has powered growth at Microsoft's Azure cloud computing business, which was the exclusive seller of OpenAI's models until April. But the mounting cost of building data centers to run those services is squeezing the company's cash flows. To help offset that, Microsoft is restructuring parts of its lagging gaming unit, described by its division head last month as needing a reset as profit margins have dropped. A report in The Information last month said the company is considering a potential spin-off of its Xbox unit or restructuring it as a wholly owned subsidiary. Big Tech's historic AI outlays, set to top $700 billion this year, are putting pressure on companies across the sector to show returns on AI and offset the rising costs of rolling it out across their businesses. Amazon and Meta Platforms have also laid off thousands of employees this year. Microsoft announced the cuts on Monday following a nearly 23% slump in its shares in the first 6 months of 2026, their worst first-half performance since 2022. Shares fell further on Monday, dropping more than 2% at one point in morning trading.
In aviation, shares in EasyJet jumped after the budget airline agreed to a £5.5 billion takeover approach from the US investment firm Castlelake. If completed, the deal could reshape Europe's airline industry while raising questions over EU ownership rules.
Shares in EasyJet rose 10% in early trading on Monday. That was after the British budget airline agreed in principle to a $7.34 billion takeover proposal from US investment firm Castlelake over the weekend. It potentially ends lengthy negotiations and could reshape Europe's aviation industry. The latest bid was at nearly 24% premium to EasyJet's share price as of Friday's close. The potential take-private deal, which also includes a partial equity alternative, comes at a challenging time for airlines still grappling with sharper higher fuel prices and margin pressure linked to the Iran conflict. On the deal, JP Morgan analysts raised concerns about how aviation-focused lender Castlelake and the EasyJet board would meet EU ownership requirements. Castlelake has previously said it would own 49% of the bidding vehicle, with the remainder held by two EU nationals, former Malaysia Airlines CEO and former EasyJet Chief Operating Officer Peter Bellew, plus senior industry executive Mark Breen. EU regulations require airlines operating in the bloc to be majority owned and controlled by EU nationals.
And finally, if you're planning a summer barbecue, your shopping bill might be getting a little bit lighter. Walmart says it's cutting the prices of everything from burgers to fizzy drinks, just as Americans gear up to celebrate the country's 250th birthday. Here's the story.
Walmart said Monday it would cut prices on many summer barbecue favorites, including meat, chips, and soda. The move comes after U.S. President Donald Trump said the retailer was acting at his administration's request. In a Truth Social post, he said Walmart would be lowering prices significantly, quote, to celebrate our great country's 250th birthday. Trump said the firm would, quote, be dropping the price for a pound of ground beef by almost 15%. Walmart said in a statement that the price of 1 pound of 73% ground beef roll would drop to $5.94 from $6.74 in its stores, a decline of about 12%. The retailer also said it lowered prices on items including Coca-Cola and PepsiCo sodas and chips. Prices for steaks and hamburger meat soared after a persistent drought burned pasture lands and hiked costs of cattle feed, forcing U.S. ranchers to slash their herds. Now the price cuts mark a notable shift from last year when Walmart warned that tariffs would push some prices higher, a move Trump had rebuked. The president had previously encouraged low-tariff imports of Argentine beef to cool U.S. prices, which angered American ranchers. He had also directed the Department of Justice to investigate whether U.S. meat packers were colluding to raise prices. Walmart is widely viewed by economists and investors as a gauge of U.S. consumer health because of its size and broad customer base.
Just a shame the Americans won't be having any more World Cup barbecues with those prices. That's your business news. Back to you, Andy.
Thank you, Katie. Very interesting stuff. All right, coming up, Islamabad and Bishkek are exploring energy, digital and connectivity projects between Central and South Asia as Pakistan's president visits Kyrgyzstan for the first time in over 2 decades. Don't go away.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Pakistan's President Asif Ali Zardari is in Kyrgyzstan for a landmark visit aimed at boosting trade, energy cooperation and regional connectivity. The talks are expected to focus on investment, agriculture, mining, digital links, and the long-delayed Kasa 1000 electricity project connecting Central and South Asia.
Pakistan's President Asif Ali Zardari arrived in Kyrgyzstan on Monday for a 4-day official visit, the first by a Pakistani president since 2005. The trip follows Kyrgyz President Sadr Japarov's trip to Pakistan last December, when the two countries signed 15 agreements and agreed to increase bilateral trade to $200 million by the year 2007 to 2008. Pakistan's Foreign Ministry says the leaders will review the full spectrum of bilateral relations and exchange views on regional and international developments. Their talks are expected to focus on trade, investment, energy, mining, agriculture, digital economy, and regional connectivity. The agenda also includes the $1.2 billion Kasa 1000 electricity project, which aims to transmit surplus hydropower from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Pakistan through Afghanistan. The project has faced years of delays because of instability in Afghanistan. This visit reflects Pakistan's broader push to deepen economic engagement with Central Asia through trade, energy cooperation, and regional connectivity. Mariam Zia, A News, Islamabad.
Well, joining us now from Islamabad is Syed Basim Raza, research analyst at the NIPS Institute. Syed, welcome. Good to have you with us on Primetime. Now, President Zardari is in Kyrgyzstan in a first visit by a president of Pakistan since 2005. Why does this trip matter now?
Okay, thank you so very much for having me, Andy. This marks a very, I would say, pivotal moment in the relationship between the Kyrgyzstan and Pakistan. We've had cordial relations with Kyrgyzstan over a very long period of time, but these were somewhat on the lines of goodwill relationships, where they were not something strategic in nature. Now, what is changing actually is that we're going to develop a strategic and economic relationships with Kyrgyzstan, and these are particularly under the overall realm or the broader context of Pakistan's Central Asia Connect policy. So the core reason behind the visit by the Kyrgyz president last year in December and President Zardari's visit right now is to develop this, I would say, holistic sort of strategic relationship.
And the bilateral trade is set to be boosted to $200 million by the year 2027-28. What's holding back the trade right now?
Okay, so our trade numbers lingered between somewhat $5 million to $11 and $15 million. Now, this is a very tiny number. This number can change by, a single contract between two multinational corporation between the two states. So it's a very small number. The goal actually to reach $200 million, it seems a bit unrealistic, but honestly speaking, it can be achieved. The only hindrance actually is the absence of commercial infrastructure. There are no banking channels, no strong, credible banking channels between the two states. There are very minimal private investments between the two states. So all of that is needed. Secondly, and most importantly, Kyrgyzstan is basically a state which is, I would say, that exports the imports that it takes from China, and then it exports it to Russia and other Central Asian Republic states, because Kyrgyzstan is just 7 million in population. So Pakistan needs to capitalize on that. Pakistan cannot promote finished products because Pakistan is not as industrialized as China, but Pakistan can export raw materials. So Pakistan has to actually pinpoint those very specific, I would say, products which are absent in that market, and then utilize this Kyrgyz transit infrastructure for promotion of trade.
And there's a lot on the agenda, very different things. There's mining, agriculture, digital links, regional connectivity. Which of these sectors would you say is the most realistic one to show progress in the near future?
Okay, let's break down one by one. Number one, mining. Mining is a very expensive endeavor to take upon by developing states. For example, if we talk about mining in Pakistan, it would need a huge capital. Secondly, a commitment that spans over decades. Second scenario, when we talk about the trade infrastructure corridors, huge corridors, they're also going to take decades. So this is something that should be considered in long term. In short term, we have so many specific sectors which can be explored. Trade facilitation, as I just talked about, we can facilitate trade. Second is the customs cooperation, banking to banking networks, private investments, IT and digital cooperation, educational cooperation, for example. Pakistan has over 276 universities, and many of them, they rank in the top 25%. For example, NUST, the National University of Sciences and Technology, where I work, it ranks in top 25% of the universities of the globe. So these can be explored. These areas are the ones which will produce immediate results, which would produce, measurable immediate results. Mining can be prioritized, but it should be considered as a long-term project, not something that we can do immediately.
Another long-term project that has been delayed for years is the Kaza 1000. It's meant to bring the surplus hydro power from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Pakistan through Afghanistan. Is this project now becoming more realistic, or is it still just an ambition?
Okay, not an ambition. I won't call it just an ambition. It is very close to its realization, but the For example, when we talk about Pakistan, Pakistan goes into huge energy deficit in summers and relies on the diesel power productions. Similarly, the Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, they have a huge surplus hydropower, and they can actually provide Pakistan with that. Everything is in place, technicalities are covered, but the only hindrance, as your correspondent talked about, is Afghanistan. Now, what do we do about Afghanistan? Afghanistan is not a very simple sort of, like conflict-ridden region that we can just, like solve it overnight. There needs to be comprehensive efforts by Central Asian republics, by Pakistan, and by other regional states if they want to actually address this Afghan security dilemma that everybody is facing. It's not just Pakistan which is facing that. So once that is resolved, the infrastructure lines are safe, there is a security stability in the region, then and only then this CASA 1000 and many other projects, when Pakistanis talk about CPEX connectivity to Central Asian republics, all of this can only be realized when Afghanistan is stable security-wise.
Security before everything. Now, Islamabad often talks about connecting South Asia and Central Asia. What needs to happen for that geography to turn into economic influence? Is it primarily security?
So, okay, since I was a student in university, we always talked about Pakistan being the geographically situated state that connects multiple regions. So it was the discourse all over the place. And it still is the case. It is an opportunity. But in order to in order to capitalize on that opportunity, Pakistan needs to address multiple, things. Including them is the security scenario, as I've already talked about. The second is an absence of a complete commercial infrastructure. We need that. We need connectivity of the Central Asian republics to the Arabian Sea, Indian Ocean by Gwadar, Bin Qasim, and the Karachi port. They have that capacity. But the core idea is to connect them to Central Asia. Now, how are you going to do that? You're going to do that by road infrastructure, the ground infrastructure. It can also be, like some sort of a train or railway infrastructure. But all of that is needed, a prerequisite, before you actually capitalize on that slogan of being situated at the crossroads of multiple regions.
Said, thank you kindly for joining us on Primetime and sharing your insight.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, after the break, we'll examine a number of new agreements between New Delhi and Jakarta as India's Prime Minister secures deals on critical minerals, agriculture, and cruise missiles during his visit to Indonesia. We'll be right back.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
We are in Seoul's Republic of Korea, a country that for more than 70 years has lived in a shadow of unfinished war.
I was 18 years old when the Korean War broke out. My two brothers were dragged out to the front yard of the village public hall and forcibly subjected to a trial under the name of People's Trial.
The military demarcation line, created after the Korean War, became a massive wall, preventing separated families from meeting.
Less than a kilometer away lies North Korea.
지금 우리 무장력은 그 어떤 위기에도 대응할 철저한 준비가 되어 있으며
Подписанный сегодня договор предусматривает в том числе оказание взаимной помощи в случае агрессии против одного из участников.
Russian-Ukraine war now is connected with North Korean participation in Russian army.
The complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is the only outcome that we will find acceptable.
If the U.S. persists in such hostile policy towards the DPRK, there will never be denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula.
Welcome back to Primetime. India and Indonesia are tightening their strategic partnership, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi calling a peaceful Indo-Pacific a shared responsibility. The visit has produced major defense, port and critical minerals agreements as New Delhi expands its regional footprint while carefully managing the China factor. Ishan Garg has more from New Delhi.
Calling India and Indonesia partners forever, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said ensuring a peaceful Indo-Pacific is their joint responsibility. In what could be seen as a veiled criticism of Beijing, Mr. Modi told the Indonesian parliament that India believes in the philosophy of development, not expansionism. His comments come as New Delhi is finding itself in the center of the region's ambition to check China's rising influence. Both New Delhi and Jakarta have border disputes with Beijing, but have stopped short of criticizing the nation openly. But analysts see the slew of new announcements during this visit as a sign of New Delhi aiming to reduce its reliance on China, expanding its footprint in the region, while simultaneously aiming to restore ties with Beijing. China has been deepening its influence across ASEAN through infrastructure financing, naval presence and trade leverage, and Indonesia has been carefully multi-sourcing its security partnerships in response. The headline outcome of this trip is a BrahMos supersonic cruise missile deal. Jakarta has also decided to procure India's Astra air-to-air missile, which analysts say helps bolster New Delhi's ambitions of being seen as a credible defense partner. On critical minerals, India will invest in manufacturing steel, nickel and rare earth magnets on Indonesian soil. It's a move that experts believe directly challenges China's dominance over global supply chains in these strategic materials. The two sides also agreed to jointly develop Sabang port, which looks over the critical trade route of the Strait of Malacca, just 100 miles from India's Nicobar Islands. The Prime Minister also invoked support from Jakarta to echo the voice of the Global South in multilateral forums, and he called for reforms at the United Nations Security Council just days before India launches its own bid to secure a non-permanent seat for the 2027 to 2028 tenure. Prime Minister Modi now heads to Melbourne on Wednesday. New Delhi is looking to solidify its partnerships under its Act East policy while hoping to reduce its trade and technological reliance on China and the US. Ishan Garg for A News in New Delhi.
Well, joining us now from Lucknow, India is historian and political analyst Dr. Khwaja Danish Hamid. Dr. Hamid, welcome. Good to have you with us. Now, India and Indonesia are two of Asia's biggest democracies, and they're moving closer on defense, trade, and maritime security. What is driving this relationship now?
See, India and Indonesia are natural strategic partners. Both are democracy and maritime powers and key players in Indo-Pacific. What is driving the relationship today is a shared interest in securing vital sea lanes, defense cooperation, expanding trade, and ensuring regional stability. As global competition intensifies, particularly in the Indo-Pacific, both countries are working together while maintaining their strategic autonomy. So this is less about forming an alliance and more about building a resilient partnership based on shared interests, maritime security, and common vision for a stable multipolar Asia.
Dr. Hamid, India and Indonesia have also signed a deal for the BrahMos, the supersonic cruise missile jointly developed by India and Russia. What message would you say does that send in the Indo-Pacific?
The BrahMos deal sends a strong strategic message. India is emerging as a credible defense exporter and security partner in Indo-Pacific. For Indonesia, it strengthens its maritime deterrence and defense capabilities and defense capabilities without entering into military alliance. More broadly, the agreement signals the regional countries are investing in strong self-defense and diversifying their security partnership to preserve stability, freedom of navigation, and regional order. So this is what is my take on this deal.
And Dr. Hamid, we are having some connection issues here, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on another thing. Both countries sit close to crucial sea lanes, and both are watching China's rise carefully. Would you say that this partnership is about regional stability or quietly balancing Beijing?
I will say it is primarily about regional stability, but balancing China's growing influence is not. I don't think I will be able to say much on this. But neither India nor Indonesia officially frames this policy as containing Beijing. Instead, both is on free, open, and rule-based Indo-Pacific securing sea lanes and respect for international laws. So this partnership is best understood as strategic hedging, strengthening their own capabilities and cooperation while preserving stability rather than forming an anti-alliance.
Dr. Hamid, thank you so much for joining us on Primetime and sharing your views. After the break, we'll check in with our correspondents around the globe. Do stay with us.
More than 20,000 partisan fighters have been hidden. We found only 3,000.
My grandmother had 3 brothers. In the graveyard, the body of just one of them.
Their struggle was very unequal and against a state that had defeated such a force as Nazi Germany.
A lot of resistant fighters in the beginning of Soviet occupation actually would end up here, if not killed somewhere in the woods.
She was arrested at her home. Her 7-year-old daughter ran to her and screamed, "Mom, please take me with you." This record having the names of the individuals who were placed in the list of deportations.
I was born in Kengia, in a labor camp. My mother was a partisan liaison.
The first years were extremely difficult, of course. Poverty, hunger. The temperature sometimes dropped to minus 50 degrees.
The train stations, like the one behind me, once said goodbyes to thousands of people carried from across the Baltic states toward Siberia.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the shade of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Let's now head to our correspondents, and we start with Poland, where Warsaw says a suspended U.S. troop rotation will resume soon as it moves to strengthen its missile production capacity through a new agreement with an American defense company. Anita Sharma reports from the Netherlands.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where Warsaw celebrates two major signs of deepening military ties with Washington on the battlefield and on the factory floor. Poland's defense minister says he received confirmation from senior U.S. officials that a previously suspended rotation of American troops to Poland will resume in the coming weeks. He called the decision very good news for the security of both Poland and NATO. The announcement follows weeks of uncertainty after the Pentagon delayed the deployment of a U.S. armored brigade as part of a broader review of America's military posture in Europe. Polish officials insisted at the time the pause was temporary, not a reduction in the U.S. military presence. The renewed troop rotation comes as Warsaw and U.S. defense company Anduril signed an agreement Monday to produce Barracuda 500 cruise missiles in Poland. The project will see Poland's state-owned defense group PGZ work with Anduril to develop a Polish version of the long-range missile, boosting both Poland's defense industry and NATO's eastern flank. Around 10,000 U.S. troops are already stationed in Poland on a rotational basis, making the country one of Washington's most important military hubs in Europe since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, the announcements come as NATO leaders gather in Ankara, where one of the alliance's biggest challenges will be demonstrating that Europe is taking greater responsibility for its own defense while maintaining a strong U.S. military commitment. Poland also joined the Netherlands, Finland, and Britain in announcing major progress on a new multilateral defense mechanism, which they aim to launch by next year. The announcements underscore what NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said should define this summit, turning last year's defense pledges into real military capability. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Marine Le Pen has avoided a political ban that would have blocked her from France's 2027 presidential race after a Paris appeals court reduced her sentence. But with electronic monitoring still part of the ruling, the National Rally senior figure now faces a choice over whether to run herself or make way for Jordan Bardella. Ross Cullen reports from Paris.
Well, the appeal trial concluded on Tuesday here at the Paris Appeals Court in the centre of the French capital. Marine Le Pen learning that her sentence has been changed and reduced from originally being barred for running for public office for 5 years or 60 months. That's been reduced, and she will now be able to run in the 2027 French presidential election. However, the new sentence is 3 years in jail, 2 of which are suspended and 1 of which will be served by wearing an electronic bracelet. She has previously said she would not want to campaign for the presidency while wearing an electronic bracelet. She will be made to wear one, and so we will see if she changes her mind or if she sticks to her original statement about not standing in the election if she's wearing an electronic tag. If she were to stand down, her place will be taken by the National Rally's 30-year-old party President Jordan Bardella, who has said that he is ready to stand if needs be. Marine Le Pen or Jordan Bardella, whoever runs in the French presidential election in April 2027, according to the latest polls, they would cruise through the first round easily and make it to the second round runoff, which is held if no one party gets more than 50% in the first round. The National Rally is the most popular party in France at the moment, according to the polls. Emmanuel Macron cannot run for a 3rd consecutive term, and so he has to step down, and Marine Le Pen feels that this could be her time, 4th time lucky to win the presidency. She could still run technically and legally, but we will have to see if indeed she does eventually stand down and hand the reins of the campaign to Jordan Bardella. Ross Cullen, A News, Paris.
A new Ebola treatment center has opened in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo as health workers battle to contain the outbreak in a region already hit by violence. The facility in Beni is meant to ease pressure on local hospitals, while insecurity continues to slow the response. Chris Ochamringa has more from Kinshasa.
The new Ebola treatment center was opened in the city of Beni in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's a 20-bed facility that will provide specialized care for patients. Authorities opened the center to ease pressure on the other health facility in the conflict-affected region. Attacks by rebels of the Allied Democratic Forces have left dozens of civilians dead and forced hundreds to flee their homes since the beginning of this year. The insecurity has hampered health workers' efforts to trace and isolate the suspected Ebola patients, leading to the continued spread of cases in the provinces of Ituri, North Kivu, and South Kivu. The DRC government recently said it reinforced security in the region to ensure health workers carry out their work safely. Experts have also begun clinical trials of 2 drugs aimed at reducing deaths among patients infected with the Bundibuja strain of Ebola. The latest Ebola outbreak is the 17th to occur in the DRC since 1976. Chris Ochamringa for A News in Kinshasa.
Iraq is preparing to host major funeral processions for Iran's late Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei in the holy cities of Najaf and Karbala. The ceremonies underline the religious and political weight of the moment as Tehran projects unity abroad amid tensions with the US and Israel. Tura Shiralil reports on the latest developments from Tehran.
Iraqi authorities are gearing up to host a massive funeral procession of the former leader of Iran, Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Khamenei, on Wednesday in the cities of Najaf and Karbala. Najaf is home to the mausoleum of Imam Ali, cousin and son-in-law of Prophet Muhammad and the 4th caliph of early Islam period, as well as the first Shia Imam. The city of Karbala, one of the revered cities of Shia Muslims, is where the shrine of Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Imam Hussein, is located. Besides a political figure, Iran's late supreme leader was a grand Ayatollah, a high-ranking status in Shia Islam. While his body was transferred to the city of Qom for rituals on Tuesday, 11 provinces in Iraq have announced public holidays on Wednesday and Thursday to hold the mourning services. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi paid a visit to the neighboring country last week to discuss the funeral arrangements with officials in Baghdad and the cities hosting the rituals. Iranian and Iraqi officials said that the funeral procession in Iraq is a sign of solidarity between the two Shia majority neighboring countries, despite their 8 years of war under Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein in the 1980s. Analysts say that the funeral rites in Iraq are also a show of muscle abroad by Tehran, wielding its regional power amid the ongoing military standoff with the United States and Israel. The procession will end on Thursday in the city of Mashhad, the hometown of the former leader of Iran, by laying his body to rest at the shrine of the 8th Imam of Shiites. Throughout the week of rituals, angry mourners have been chanting slogans and carrying posters calling for vengeance on Israel and the US, and protesting at the ceasefire negotiations with Washington. Meantime, it was reported by Pakistani media that the third round of Tehran-Washington ceasefire talks will be held on the 14th and 15th of July in Islamabad. So far, Iranian officials have not confirmed the resumption of mediated talks next week, as the country has been mobilized to hold the extensive public processions. Puraj Shiralilu from Tehran for A News.
Construction work is moving ahead on the Tapi gas pipeline inside Afghanistan, with officials saying more than 100 kilometers of pipe have now been laid. The long-delayed project is seen as a major test of regional energy connectivity, linking Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. Tamim Bahis has the details from Kabul.
The Tapi project, which stands for Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, is designed to transport natural gas from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan to Pakistan and India. The Ministry of Mines and Petroleum says major construction and preparatory work is underway on the Tapi gas pipeline inside Afghanistan. According to officials, 101 kilometers of pipeline have so far been laid, while 126 kilometers of the project corridor have been prepared. Authorities added that trench excavation, pipe transportation, welding and pipe laying operations are continuing across different sections of the project. So far, trenches extending more than 70 kilometers have been excavated, while 36 kilometers of pipeline have already been buried underground. Officials also say nearly 90 kilometers of pipeline have been transported already to the site to speed up the next phases of construction. For Afghanistan, the project is expected to bring transit revenue, create jobs, and strengthen the country's role as a regional energy corridor. It's been discussed for years, but progress inside Afghanistan has gained renewed attention as authorities highlight it as a major economic and strategic project, playing an important role in energy connectivity, economic growth, and regional cooperation. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Uzbekistan is hosting the first International Forum on Islamic Civilization, bringing together scholars, ministers, and religious leaders from across the Muslim world. The 5-day event focuses on preserving Islamic heritage, expanding research cooperation, and using digital tools to protect centuries-old manuscripts and scholarship. Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
More than 300 delegates from across the Muslim world have gathered in Uzbekistan for the first International Forum on Islamic Civilization. The forum brings together ministers, muftis, leading scholars and representatives of international organizations, including ISESCO and the Muslim World League, to discuss research, education, manuscript preservation and the digital future of Islamic heritage. Held in Tashkent, Samarkand and Termez, the 5-day forum focuses on strengthening collaboration in preserving Islamic scientific and cultural heritage, while promoting the authentic values of Islam based on peace, tolerance and enlightenment.
This forum gathered many scholars from different countries, and the most important is the topic of this forum. It indicates how important Islamic civilization and how if we put our hands together, we can bring back our Islamic civilization, our Islamic legacy, which started and I think Uzbekistan could initiate based on the initiative from His Excellency President Shaukat Mirziyoyev.
Beyond the discussions, the forum will feature a series of landmark scientific and cultural initiatives, including the launch of the Scientific Atlas of Islamic Civilization, an AI-powered model designed to decipher centuries-old Arabic manuscripts, as well as digital museum projects and new publications aimed at preserving and promoting Islamic scholarly heritage for future generations.
Abu Ali ibn Sina was the teacher of Europe for centuries. His ideas shaped learning and scholarship for generations. Today, we need to restore these traditions. We should sign agreements between countries, invite teachers, send our own students abroad, including to Russia, and continue exchanging knowledge. That is how people can come together once again.
The forum is expected to conclude with the adoption of the Tashkent Declaration, alongside new cooperation agreements and a roadmap for developing the Center for Islamic Civilization through 2030, reinforcing Uzbekistan's ambition to become a global hub for research, dialogue, and the preservation of Islamic heritage. It is Yulia Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Fuel security is becoming a growing concern across Central Asia as countries look for ways to reduce exposure to supply shocks. Kyrgyzstan has turned to Kazakhstan for possible gasoline imports, while wider disruption linked to Russia's energy sector is adding pressure across the region. Fariza Kalimurzina reports.
Kazakhstan is reviewing an official request from Kyrgyzstan for gasoline supplies. Vice Energy Minister Kayrkan Tutkushbayev says the request is now under consideration. He also stressed that even if the exports are approved, they would not affect fuel prices in Kazakhstan. The request comes as Kyrgyzstan looks to strengthen its fuel security. More than 90% of the country's gasoline and diesel imports come from Russia, leaving it vulnerable to supply disruptions, global price swings, and geopolitical risks. While officials say current fuel reserves are sufficient, Bishkek is seeking to diversify its imports. Alongside Kazakhstan, it has also approached Belarus, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan is stepping up efforts to prevent the illegal export of fuel. Authorities have reported a sharp increase in gasoline consumption in 3 border regions, West Kazakhstan, Pavlodar, and Aktobe. And according to the Energy Ministry, some of the increase may be linked to fuel being smuggled across the border in vehicles fitted with oversized fuel tanks. Officials say the situation is being monitored and enforcement measures have been strengthened. The developments come as Ukraine's strikes on Russia's energy infrastructure continue to affect energy supplies across the region. Following an attack on the Orenburg gas processing plant, concerns over fuel security have grown in Central Asia. Tajikistan, which imports 84% of its fuel from Russia, is also looking for alternative suppliers, including potential crude oil imports from Iran. In Uzbekistan, shortages and higher jet fuel prices have already forced the national airline to reduce some of its flights. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
China and Russia have begun their joint Sea 2026 naval drills near Qingdao, involving warships, submarines, and naval aviation. Both sides called the exercises routine, but the drills highlight deepening military coordination as tensions with the United States and its allies continue. Mahnur Makhdoom has more on that in Beijing.
China and Russia officially started the Joint Sea 2026 naval exercise in waters and airspace near Qingdao in eastern China's Shandong province. The week-long drills involve a warship, submarines, naval aviation, and support vessels from both countries, with participating forces conducting joint command operations, maritime defense, anti-submarine warfare, search and rescue, and coordinated maneuvers at sea. China's Ministry of National Defense said that the exercise is part of the annual military cooperation plan agreed by both countries and is aimed at strengthening strategic coordination, enhancing joint operational capabilities, and contributing to regional peace and stability. Russia has similarly stated that the drills are not directed against any third country, with the Kremlin describing them as routine military cooperation between strategic partners. Beijing and Moscow have steadily deepened their military cooperation over the past 2 decades. The two countries have held irregular joint sea naval exercises since 2012, expanding their scope from coastal defense to long-range operations involving the Pacific, Mediterranean, Baltic, and Sea of Japan. Although China and Russia do not maintain a formal military alliance, both governments describe their relationship as a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. Both emphasize that their partnership is based on non-alignment and is not targeted at any specific country. However, their defense cooperation has intensified since the deterioration of both countries' relations with the United States and its allies. Manu Maktoum, A News, Beijing.
Okay, after a short break, we'll take a look at other top stories making the headlines today. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to fears. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Welcome back to Primetime. Ukraine is urging NATO allies to strengthen its air defenses after a deadly Russian strike on Kyiv exposed shortages in Patriot missiles. The appeal comes as leaders gather in Turkey, with Ukraine's long-range attacks and wider regional tensions also intensifying.
Ukraine is pressing NATO allies for stronger air defense support after Russia's latest major strike on Kyiv on Monday. Officials say at least 28 people were killed in the capital and the surrounding region, saying that Russia fired 23 ballistic missiles and none of them were intercepted. Kyiv says this shows a critical shortage of Patriot interceptors. Zelensky calls for strong decisions at the NATO summit in Turkey, which begins on Tuesday.
We do not have enough means of defense, especially Patriot missiles. We have shown all our partners both the need for, and most importantly, the possibility of, providing greater protection for human life. It is simply absurd that in the modern world, production has still not been scaled up to the level actually required to protect people from ballistic terror.
However, Russia says its strikes targeted military-industrial facilities, energy infrastructure, and military airfields. Meanwhile, Ukraine says it's expanding its own long-range campaign against Russian energy targets. Kyiv says its drones hit the Omsk oil refinery in Siberia on Monday in one of its longest-range attacks of the war. The facility lies nearly 2,500 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Russian officials confirmed the refinery was hit and say there were no casualties. Azerbaijan has also summoned Russia's ambassador after a Russian drone strike hit a Soka fuel station in Ukraine's Mykolaiv region. Baku says previous Soka facilities in Ukraine have also been targeted, calling the repeated attacks deliberate. The escalation comes as US President Donald Trump says a resolution to the war may be closer than many people realize. Trump is expected to discuss Ukraine at the NATO summit in Ankara, including in talks with Zelensky on Wednesday.
Still on the Russia-Ukraine war, frustration is mounting across Russia as fuel shortages spread, forcing drivers to spend hours in queues at petrol stations and disrupting daily routines. Here's more.
Long queues are forming at petrol stations across Russia as fuel shortages spread from the Baltic region to Siberia, following intensified Ukrainian attacks on Russian energy infrastructure. Drivers in many parts of the country are waiting for hours to refuel, with some stations running out of petrol and diesel and putting up out-of-order signs on their pumps. In June, most Russian regions introduced fuel purchase limits, restricting how much drivers could buy at one time.
I work as a taxi driver. I work until lunch, and after lunch I stand for a couple of hours at petrol stations. In Lyubertsy, in Balashika. 2 days ago I stood in a queue for 2 hours. Same thing there. I drove in, they closed it and put up a technical brake for another 2 hours. And that's it.
The main problem is not that there's nowhere to refuel or anything like that, but that people are getting very angry. Long queues, refueling is difficult, plus the heat. For many people, the air conditioning doesn't work. Some people even feel unwell in the queues.
In late June, President Vladimir Putin pledged measures to stabilize the fuel market, while Russian authorities urged the public to remain calm, saying supply chain problems were being addressed. However, the shortages continue to disrupt daily life. A June survey showed public confidence slipping. The share of Russians who believed the country was on the right track fell from 61% in May to 52% in June, while President Putin's approval rating dropped to 74%, its lowest level since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022.
Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has announced his resignation as the Member of Parliament for Clacton-on-Sea, but confirmed he will contest the by-election triggered by his resignation in the same constituency. The announcement comes amid intense scrutiny over allegations that he failed to declare a £5 million donation from a billionaire cryptocurrency investor. Farage has denied any wrongdoing and accused the media of harassment, characterizing the forthcoming by-election as a battle between, quote, the people and the establishment. Kenya's capital is under tight security ahead of Saba Saba demonstrations. The anniversary remains a symbol of civic activism, with this year's rallies coming amid renewed political and economic pressure.
Kenya's capital has a heavy police presence ahead of Saba Saba demonstrations on Tuesday. Officers have set up checkpoints, mounted barbed wire around Parliament, and increased patrols on major roads leading into the capital. Authorities say the measures are intended to maintain public order, with vehicles being screened at key entry points into the city. Traffic was lighter than usual, while a number of businesses remained closed as some residents stayed away from the city centre over concerns about possible unrest. Saba Saba means 7-7 and commemorates the pro-democracy protests of the 7th of July 1990, which helped pave the way for Kenya's transition from one-party rule to a multi-party political system. The anniversary has since become a symbol of civic activism and is frequently marked by demonstrations calling for political and economic reforms. This year's commemorations come just weeks after the second anniversary of the 2024 Gen Z protests, which began over proposed tax increases before evolving into broader demands for government accountability. The demonstrations culminated in the storming of Parliament and became one of Kenya's most significant protest movements in recent history.
China is facing criticism after confirming a long-range ballistic missile test in the Pacific. Beijing says the launch was routine, but Australia, Japan, the US, and Taiwan say it raises fresh concerns over transparency and regional security.
China is facing growing international criticism after it confirmed it carried out a routine long-range ballistic missile test in the Pacific. Beijing says the missile, carrying a dummy warhead, was launched from a People's Liberation Army Navy nuclear submarine into international waters as part of its annual military training program. Chinese officials insist the test complied with international law.
What I can tell you is that this was a routine military training activity. It was not directed at any specific country or target, and relevant countries were notified in advance, and it was conducted in accordance with international law and established international practice.
However, Australia says that China provided insufficient notice to neighbouring countries and argued it did not meet the notification standards set out under the Hague Code of Conduct against ballistic missile proliferation.
Australia has been clear with China that we regard this as destabilising to the region. Australia has been clear that this proposed test is in the context of a rapid military build-up by China, which is lacking in the transparency and reassurance as to intent that the region expects.
Japan also expressed its concern over the launch of the missile and said it will continue to maintain the highest level of vigilance and surveillance. The United States called on China to engage in meaningful arms control discussions. Washington says Beijing's rapid and opaque nuclear weapons expansion remains a concern for regional and global security. Meanwhile, Taiwan's National Security Council released what it said was the missile's flight path, showing it passing over the Philippines before landing in the Pacific Ocean south of Nauru. Taipei described the launch as a provocation that undermined stability in the Indo-Pacific. The launch was China's first publicly acknowledged intercontinental range missile test since 2024 and has renewed calls for greater transparency over Beijing's expanding military capabilities.
And for some tech stock news before we go, SK Hynix is preparing one of the world's largest share sales as investor appetite for AI-linked chip stocks continues to surge. The listing comes as South Korea pushes to expand its semiconductor capacity, with SK Hynix at the center of that strategy.
SK Hynix has already drawn indications of interest worth up to $7 billion from major investors after launching a 43 trillion won, or $28 billion US share sale, expected to become one of the world's largest. The company plans to sell 17.79 million American depository receipts on the Nasdaq, with every 10 ADR representing one common share. Despite closing down 3.4% on Monday, SK Hynix shares remain up about 260% this year, as strong global investor demand for AI stocks continues to fuel gains. The share sale comes as South Korea steps up investment in its semiconductor industry, with the government aiming to double the country's memory chip production capacity within 5 years. SK Hynix and Samsung are expected to play a central role in that expansion. The final price of the New York listing is due to be set on Thursday, ahead of trading beginning on Friday. If completed as expected, the deal would rank as the world's second largest share sale after SpaceX's record offering last month, surpassing Saudi Aramco's 2019 IPO and Alibaba's similar-sized offering in 2014.
Well, that's our show. Thank you so much for watching, and join us again tomorrow. From all of us here at A News, have a very nice evening.